Okay, good morning all. I'm Fatima Hasna. Me and Binu are doing the archetypal interpretation of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Of that, I'll be explaining what is archetypal criticism, its origin and development. Binu will be doing the rest of the session. Archetypal criticism. So, what is an archetype? The term archetype is a Greek word which means original form. It is something that molded first as a model from which all the things of the same kind are copied or on which they are based. It refers to the universal symbols, themes, characters, and images we find repeated throughout literature. So, what is archetypal criticism? In literary criticism, the term archetype denotes narrative designs, patterns of action, character types, themes, and images which recur in a wide variety of works of literature, as well as in myths, dreams, and even social rituals. Such recurrent items are often claimed to be the result of elemental and universal patterns in the human psyche whose effective embodiment in a literary work evokes a profound response from the attentive reader because he or she shares the psychic archetypes expressed by the author. In other words, these patterns reveal universal meaning and basic truths about the human condition for readers regardless of where or when they live. So, where does this idea come from? A group of cultural anthropologists from Cambridge University, especially James G. Fraser, identified elemental patterns of myth and ritual that recur in the legends and ceremonials of diverse and far flung cultures and religions. James Fraser's most noted work, The Golden Bough, is a comprehensive survey of the myths, rituals, and religious practices of the different societies of the world, especially the primitive ones. Carl Jung, the 20th century Swiss psychiatrist and the founder of analytical psychology, while studying the myths and religions of cultures past and present, noticed that many of them shared similar patterns, themes, and symbols. He also found that some of these themes and symbols arose in the dreams and fantasies of patients who suffered from schizophrenia. In his inquiry to find what causes these similarities, he reached in an interesting conclusion. Jung proposed that human psyche is not exclusively the product of personal experiences. There exist identical psychic structures, common to all, which are heritable and influence the way all humans experience the world. Jung called these psychic structures archetypes. Here, Jung applied the term archetype to what he called primordial images. He used it to refer to the experiences of our ancestors, which get lodged in what he called the collective unconscious of the whole race. Archetypes exist in the collective unconscious. These buried experiences seek expression in myths as well as in literature. As a result, archetypes such as shadow, fire, snake, hell, mother, paradise, etc., constantly surface in myths. Jung says that from the unconscious there emanate determining influences which, independently of tradition, guarantee in every single individual a similarity and even a sameness of experience, and also it is represented imaginatively. Now, Jungian archetypes. According to Jung, archetypes are inherited potentials that are actualized when they enter consciousness as images or manifest in behavior on interaction with the outside world. They are autonomous and hidden forms which are transformed once they enter the consciousness and are given particular expression by individuals and cultures. Archetypes are highly developed elements of the collective unconscious. The existence of archetypes can be inferred from stories, art, myth, religions, and dreams. Jung's idea was based on Immanuel Kant's categories, Plato's ideas, and Arthur Schopenhauer's prototypes. Jung described archetypal events, archetypal figures, and archetypal motifs. Archetypal events may include birth, death, separation from parents, marriage, and the union of opposites. Archetypal figures may include great mother, father, god, devil, child, wise old man, wise old woman, and trickster and the hero. The archetypal motifs may include apocalypse, deluge, and creation. However, Jung outlined five main archetypes: the self, the persona, the anima, the animus, and the shadow. Jung defined 12 primary archetypes that represent the range of basic human motivations. They are ruler, creator or artist, sage, innocent, explorer, rebel, hero, wizard, jester, everyman, lover, and caregiver. Each archetype plays a role in personality, but most people are dominated by one specific archetype. The four cardinal orientations that these archetypes are seeking to realize are ego, or leave a mark on the world, order, or provide structure to the world, social, or connect to others, and freedom, or yearn for paradise. Mount Bodkin's archetypal patterns of poetry was the first noted attempt to interpret a literary text based on archetypal criticism. She applied Carl Jung's theories to literature. The Canadian mythologist and scholar critic Northrop Frye, in his influential book Anatomy of Criticism, developed the archetypal approach into a radical and comprehensive revision of basic concepts of both theory of literature and practice of literary criticism. Hence, Frye proposed that the totality of literary works constitute a self-contained literary universe which has been created over the ages by the human imagination so as to assimilate the alien and strange world of nature into archetypal forms to satisfy human desires and needs. Fry classifies the literary universe into four categories corresponding to the four natural seasons. He calls them mythos. In it, comedy corresponds to spring, romance to summer, tragedy to autumn, and satire to winter. Frey's contributions leads us directly into the mythological approach of literary criticism. So that's all about the archetypal criticism. I hope it's clear. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you all are safe. I am here to discuss how we can apply the theory of archetypal criticism or myth criticism in this novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Hasn't my friend has given you an intelligible idea about the theory, so let me move to the situation that present in the novel. Before that, I would like to give you an idea about the myth of American Dream and American Adam, since I am here to discuss very first about the myth criticism and American Dream and Huckleberry Finn as an American Adam. So I am dealing with what is American Dream. Perhaps you might have heard that. So, American Dream in the belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what the class they were born into, can attain their own versions of success in a society in which upward mobility is possible for everyone. The American Dream is believed to be achieved through sacrifices, risk-taking, and hard work rather than by chance. There is a myth that the New World, of course, America is considered a garden of New Eden. After the colonization for Europeans, America was a fresh start, like a new beginning of a free society where anything is possible for them. This idea is what begins the idea of the American Eden. So, if there is an Eden, of course, there should be an Adam. Adam is a hero of our Eden. So, obviously, you are familiar with the myth of Adam, Eve, and Eden. So the term American Adam is generally refers to a mythical concept considered by some critics and scholars to be the central element of American literature. Its assumption is based on the view of American colonists who saw America, the New World, not only as a heaven from religious persecution, but also a new Garden of Eden. So let's move to the traits of American Adam. Obviously, he will be a social outsider and he will not have familial ties. He might be innocent and close to the nature. Also, his nature leads him to trouble or fraud. So he makes sort of mistakes that creates himself. He will have a curse. We can see that American Adam's curse. He will have a curse of or searching a sense of self by the physically challenging journey where the Adam learns himself, and finally he will have a thirst for belonging. So these are all about the American dream and American Adam. So the problem is, how can we place or how can we consider Huck as an American Adam? Mark Twain connects Adam to Huckleberry Finn according to myth criticism, which provides a brand new perspective to reveal the awakening process of Huckleberry Finn. Obviously, the novel is a typical representation of American dream, while the archetype of American dream is a rebuilding of the paradise of Eden, whose hero is Adam. Adam has always been longing for freedom and innovation, which is similar to Huckleberry Finn's individualism and the ceaseless pursuing of freedom. So we can connect the traits of Huck to American Adam. As you already know, like Adam, Huck has raised himself in the woods. He is orphaned without familial bonds and he feels most comfortable in the wild. Though rudimentally educated, he is naive about people and harsh realities of the world. He grows to know himself as his limits as ventures down the river. He seeks a family and eventually finds that bond. We can call the connection from the text itself, like, of course, Huck displays many character traits of American Adam. For example, in the prologue, we can see it's like Carter. The helplessness of mere innocence has been a primary theme of novelists. And we can see throughout the novel, like Tom sometimes convinces Huck to change his plan. For example, when both boys are making up plans to help Jim escape, Tom says to Huck, Huck, you don't ever seem to want to do anything regular. You want to be starting something fresh all the time. So also there can be many other archetypal patterns like hero, journey of hero, water symbolism, and Jungian patterns like shadow, the self, and so on. Of course, we can consider Huck as a hero since he displays honesty, leadership, and goodwill. Huck Finn best fits the description of a hero because he is honest. He also develops his own morals. Huck goes against this public concept of slavery he feels that is unjust. Also, his willingness to go against the society to support his own feelings set him apart from others. Sometimes he effectively represents the great man in the several instances. So the heroic journey in Finn could be called as initiation, where the hero undergoes a series of excruciating ordeals in passing from ignorance and immaturity to social and spiritual adulthood. Initiation most commonly consists of three different distinct phases like separation, transformation, and return. In the novel, the first phase, that is the separation caused by Huck's father himself. He caused the call to take an adventure which Huck undertakes. With his sinister repulsiveness, Huck's father is a classic representation of the devil figure outlined by Jung as the shadow. The second phase of initiation is the transformation, in which Huck becomes a new person. Huck matures morally and spiritually. He develops his own sense of logic and opinions based upon his own moral values. The transformation phase is the most significant phase since the end story of the novel is based upon it. At the end of the story, Huck returns to his life on Polly wishes to adopt Huck and civilize him, and he agrees to become civilized. So thus Huck passes through the three phases of initiation. So I'm going to discuss the following universal archetypes that can be seen in this novel. Of course, the first is one of them, like Don Quixote.
Yeah,
Huck.
it's already 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm concluding. And the first, like Don Quixote and the water symbolism, of course, we can see, and the trickster, wise old man, and the archetypal women like the good mother, the terrible mother, and the soulmate. So summing up, we can say that in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, archetype shapes the characters, mood, and setting of the story. Each character's actions and words shapes how they react in a particular situation. As different a character may be seen externally, there are underlying universal themes that successfully unite them with one another. Thank you all.
Thank you, Binu and Hasnat. It was a fabulous presentation. Now, let me invite Falwa and Rana for introducing biographical and historical criticism.
Good morning, all. Hope I'm audible. So, the with today is biographical criticism. I'll be giving an overview of criticism, then I'll give giving an biographical perspective towards the novel. That you can understood as a author's life story. It is that distracts from and it worse distorts the process of analyzing, appreciating, and understanding. I could argue that there are texts, the knowledge of an author's biography can help us. Some
Sister,
use
there
their,
is a break in between your voice.
is it really bad?
No, no, in between there's break.
I hope I'll be audible enough. Okay, I'll continue. Some authors use their own lives as inspiration for their writing. Early childhood events, psychological illnesses, relational conflicts, desires, among other things, may all arise in an author's work. Resource materials such as articles, credible biographies might reveal an author's intention in writing a work. An author might reveal his or her intention in an essay, letter, or autobiography. Biographical criticism is not a new approach to literature. This long-standing critical method dates back at least to the Renaissance period, was extensively by Samuel Johnson in his Lives of the Poets. Biographical criticism remains a significant mode of literary inquiry throughout the 20th century, particularly in the studies of Charles Dickens, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and the study of authors such as Walt Whitman and William Shakespeare. The 19th century biographical criticism came under disapproval by the so-called new critics of the 1920s who coined the term biographical fallacy to describe criticism that neglected the imaginative genesis of literature. And ever since the French critic Roland Barthes announced the death of the author in 1968, biographical approach has lost its appeal for many scholars. Biographical because usually a certain time period influences an author. Biographical is based on the author including an author's time period in chain, linking it to historical criticism. Now, should be cautious of fictional even events and often suffer a sea change when they are introduced into novels. Now, while looking at a novel perspective, questions like verifiable aspects of the author's biography show up in his work, or whether places aspects of his or her familial life into the world of literary text can be asked. Now, since we are dealing with biographical, it's better to my life was like. But when he was 4 years old, his family moved to nearby Hannibal, a bustling river town. Now, this proved to be a formative event in his life because it placed him right on the banks of the Mississippi River, which would become an important aspect of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And were to slavery. Both his father and uncle owned slaves in Missouri. As a result, Clement spent much of his childhood playing around slave quarters, and he was deeply attracted to African American culture, folk beliefs, and music. Violence was a commonplace in Missouri, and young Twain witnessed much death. Also, for the year, it became a Mississippi River. Now we'll be looking at the novel from a biographical perspective. There is more Huckleberry Finn based on the book St. Peter town, Hannibal, Missouri, and the Glasscock Island that is in the Mississippi River, where young Twain and his friends took a in Arkansas. Although he claimed to have character been early to admit that don't talk again. For his twins was more of the Twain became a visual character. The fact that Huck was a man that both sister Pamela, Blanket Huck's father, on another Hannibal citizen, Jimmy Finn, the town drunk, and the brother of the prototype Huck, Benson Blankenship, aided a slave to escape in 1847. Benson's refusal to return the slave for reward is reflected in Huck's loyalty to Jim in defiance of law, society, and the shooting of Old Box by Colonel Sherburne is drawn from the killing of one Uncle Sam Smart by William Owsley on the street of Hannibal on January 1845. And the attempted lynching of Sherburne is also an echo of something that Mark Twain saw as a boy. In the summers, Clemens used to visit his Uncle John Quarles' farm near Florida, Missouri, which doubles as a Phelps farm in the novel. He listened to ghost stories told by the slave Uncle Daniel, who served in part as a model for in this was well sympathy to her and honest heart. Papin ways exaggerated version of Twain's father. Huck gave all his money to Judge Thatcher because he was so shows was good with money. John Marshall Clemens was a perpetually person. Also, his father once sold an elderly enslaved man named Charles $dollars worth of. This made a really powerful impression on the 6-year-old because he was also sold for $40 by the Duke of the Dauphin. So just as Twain was haunted by the sale of Charlie, too, his king and auction with claim. See the is based on a performance that recorded in his entry made if I never. King was one response to Twain sounds exactly like Park Finn talking to Huck. It is when he was Twain pointedly
Riva, your voice is breaking constantly. Is it over, Valva, your presentation?
No, there's a little bit more.
So if you want, you continue it. And
Okay,
then ask Rana to start her presentation after yours.
okay. Death shocked Sam Clemens' life by taking away of his loved ones. So too death and violence pervades his fiction. The novel is called Sons and Watson all died. Now, in an account, 17-year-old Twain feels responsible because of the religion he learned as a child, but discarded it as an adult. A transformation that is echoed in Huck's decision in chapter 31 to tear up the letter and go to hell. Now, from this, you can understand that an author's life contributes to the meaning of their text because they incorporate their life memories, experiences, and lessons into their stories. By using their own experiences, authors such as Mark Twain are able to make their stories more in depth. So now, conclude my presentation. We'll move on to now. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're
Yes,
audible.
Rana, you're.
Okay, good morning. So, I would like to speak about historical criticism of Huckleberry Finn. So, first, let's look what is historical criticism. Historical criticism is also known as historicism or higher criticism. It is a branch of criticism that investigates the origin of ancient text in order to understand the world behind the text. It is also a branch of history which looked at literature with evidence about economic and political events going on at that time, and the works produced also looked at historical events to explain its content. This criticism insisted that to understand a literary piece, we need to understand the author's biography, social background, and ideas circulating at that time, and also the culture. Historical criticism also refers specifically the questions about historical character of a work. It is not a criticism in the sense of disapproval or the examination of faults and mistakes, but instead is an analysis of the text in the hope of better understanding it. Historical criticism seeks greater understanding of biblical text by analyzing the historical and social context in which they developed. Historical criticism has also often sought answers to the ever elusive question of authorial intent. That is, what did the author intend for this text to mean in his or her time and place? Now I'd like to speak about the methods of historical criticism. The three most widely used methods are source criticism, form criticism, and redaction criticism. Source criticism questions whether text came from a singular source, author, or historical context and seeks to untangle the sources present within any given text. Form criticism, it seeks to understand the claims of a text by analyzing its linguistic patterns. And finally, redaction criticism. In redaction criticism, it analyzes how redactors or editors work together various traditions into one whole. Now, coming to Huckleberry Finn on the basis of history. Murphy ma'am,
Continue, Rana. That's okay. Just take 4 or 5 minutes.
okay, ma'am. Now, coming to Huckleberry Finn on the basis of historical criticism. As we all know, it's written by Mark Twain. Mark Twain is one of the authors that wrote novels which consist of social problems. This novel is a reflection from his social background. This novel is set in 1840s Missouri, a time and place where the disputes that would lead to the Civil War were coming to a boil. The story is set in pre-Civil War days, though it was written 2 decades after the Emancipation Proclamation, which means the end of the slavery in the United States of America and after the Civil War in the southern states. This novel offers a portrait of difficult attitude towards slavery and demonstrates how the latent racism that existed in pre-Civil War times did not change with the war. The main dispute facing the nation was, of course, the battle over the legality and morality of slavery. People in the South did not understand that Negroes or slaves, their former property, should have the same right as they have. Wealthy Southerners in particular were determined to preserve their way of life, and they fought hard to maintain the legality of slavery. Southerners were aware that if opponents of the slavery began to outnumber slavery supporters in Congress, the balance of power but shift in slavery would probably be outlawed. Slaves in the United States suffered from the mistreatment of the white people as they were stripped of their names and dehumanized in many ways. The issue of slavery had indeed threatened to divide the United States from the very beginning. In northern states, where industrialization made cheap labor less of an economic necessity, the abolitionist movement rapidly gained momentum in the early 1800s. The economies of the southern state, however, were based in farming and large land owners required cheap labor. After 200 years of living with large slave population, Southerners had come to see slavery as a part of their cultural heritage. Now I'd like to also speak about the condition of the slaves of America. American slaves were denied every basic human right they could write. They could not vote, they could not assemble in groups, they could not own property or sell anything. They could not even travel away from their masters without permission. They were denied basic education and it was illegal to teach a slave to read. Slaves breaking these laws were punished by flogging. Slaves were the property of their masters and it was pure and simple. Slaves tried to escape their bondage with great regularity. About 1,000 used to succeed every year with the help of the Underground Railroad, a network of abolitionists dedicated to helping slaves find freedom. Now coming to the slaves we see in Huckleberry Finn. Slaves in Huckleberry Finn are not working on plantation in the deep south, but they are house servants and general laborers in the border states. We can't find any scenes of beating or torturing of slaves in this book, or there is no cruel or overseer or a wicked master. Twain had no need to reiterate the better-known evils of slave life. Slaves in the United States suffered from the mistreatment of the white people. Mark Twain in Huckleberry Finn focuses on the ignorance of the Southern society and Southern people in their support to slavery. They did not have the right to make contracts or own properties. Mark Twain uses his characters to embody real issues that blacks suffered from. Coming to the character Jim, he's an African American and he's a slave. He's running away from his honor as he overhears his master's plan to sell him. This itself clearly shows the condition of African Americans. They were kept as slaves and moreover had no freedom. Jim's continued enslavement is both absurd and grotesque and is a harsh comment on the racial condition of post-Civil War America. Blacks suffered from white mistreatment. They didn't even consider as humans at all. Coming to Huckleberry Finn, we can see that Tom suggests Huck to tie Jim onto a tree just for fun. We can also see another instance in which Huckleberry Finn also tries to trick Jim when he reunites with him and he acts like everything was a dream. Their separation and everything was a dream Jim had. All the characters in Huckleberry Finn are involved with the institution of slavery. It is either by being themselves slaves like Jim or their own slaves or making money from slavery.
You have completed your time.
Okay, I've got 3 more slides. Well, then I would like to conclude my presentation by just pointing out few points which I've noted. Can I do that?
Okay, okay.
Okay. Now, uh, aristocracy is represented by Granchford, Shepherdson, and Colonel Sherburne in Huckleberry Finn. The Granchford parlor shows more of Philistinism and Puritanism than of genuine culture. Colonel Sherburne, and in particular, illustrates another aspect of the traditional aristocrats, his contempt for the common man, which is reflected in his cold-blooded shooting of old Boggs, his cavalier gesture of tossing a pistol on the ground afterward, and his single-handedly facing down the lynch mob. Huckleberry Finn gives its readers a portrait gallery of its time. As I said, the aristocracy is represented by the Granchfords, Shepherdson, and all. The slave-owning characters in Huckleberry Finn are indeed well-meaning, respectable women, and yet the very nature of the slave-owner relationship causes these women and their slaves great sorrow. Like Watson and Widow Douglas are quite religious and pious women, but they own a slave. Twain indeed here reflects his reality existing in that society. He also indeed criticizes Christianity, as this novel explores moral and racial circumstances at its time. Readers, Twain uses this opportunity to satirically expose the white and the blacks of the society. Huck encounters many different aspects of civilization because he was helping Jim, yet he had doubts like whether it was appropriate to help Jim or not. At the time Twain was writing this book, African Americans had seemingly made little progress despite the Civil War, as racism and violence were rampant. One example in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn that stands out especially for modern readers is the frequent use of the word nigger, which was an accepted part of the vernacular at that time being depicted. The frequent usage of the term throughout the book has led some contemporary audience to brand the work as racist and to insist on banning it. We can also see that Huck's father is also racist because he was against government allowing blacks to vote. Throughout the novel, we come across a sad real truth that Jim doesn't get out anywhere with Huck because he would be caught any time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Falva and Rana. It was an impressive presentation. Now, Farisa and Nejma is here to introduce the paper Formalism.
Hello, good morning all. I am Nejma Farzana and my discussion is on the literary theory formalism. So formalism is a branch of literary theory and criticism which deals with the structure of text. It means that external agents outside of the text are now taken into consideration. Formalism starts around 1910 in Russia, but it ended very soon around 1930s. From that date till, formalism is barely used to analyze a text. So before going in detail about formalism, we can look two different methods to analyze a text. First one is textual and other one is contextual. So let's consider an example to put it in symbols. Consider the short story Puvan Param by Waika Muhammad Bashir. In the short story, Jamila Bibi is a modern girl with university degree in BA. But after the marriage with Abdul Qadir Sahib, she has lost her freedom which she enjoyed earlier and she remained as a housewife rest of her life. When I was reading this story as a kid, I laughed when Abdul Qadir Sahib beated her because of her stubborn nature for insisting on bananas instead of oranges he had brought. But when I read it in my teenage, I began to look deeper inside the text about the social background of Kerala during those times. Finally, I began to question the humor which made me laugh once. Surprisingly, after reading the text with a feministic approach, I couldn't laugh anymore. So let's come to the point that formalism is a study of a text regardless of its context. Approach a text without considering the social background or any other influences besides the voice within. Most probably, a text is analyzed with the help of feministic, Marxist, post-colonial, or But formalism deals with textual meaning and the formal devices such as rhythm, rhyme, meter, syntax, metaphor, other devices. So TS called this method as Lemon-Schuster method. And this formalism can be divided into two branches, Russian formalism and New Criticism. Russian formalism was a school of literary criticism in Russia from 1910 to 1930s. Some prominent scholars of Russian formalism were Viktor Shavansky, Yuri Chinyanov, Vladimir Prop, and Roman Jakobson. Russian formalism brought the idea of scientific analysis of poetry. Russian formalism alludes to the work of the Society for the Study of Poetic Language in St. Petersburg by Boris Echenberry, Viktor Shavansky, and Yuri Chinyanov. And New Criticism is an American literary theory in the 20th century. Its philosophy was taken from John Crowe Ransom's The New Criticism. And it talked about the close reading approach. This method was developed by I. A. Richards, in which only words on page were analyzed very closely in a text. So Viktor Shavansky says that literary language is an ordinary language, but this ordinary language has been defamiliarized. So if we are able to understand the metaphors, similes, one will be able to understand the work without any other influences. This is the major tenet in formalism. As the name suggests, formalism is a scientific or technical mode of understanding text which expects a greater degree of mental intelligence instead of emotional intelligence from the readers. In spite of the fact that it was the first practical critical theory, nobody ever used formalism to analyze the text. It's because, as we know that literature is inseparable from culture, and if we separate literature from culture, it loses its value and influence. So it ended very soon. So by this, I conclude my words, and the application of formalism on the Huckleberry Finn will be taken by Farisa. Over to you, Farisa. Thank you.
Morning, dears. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
As Najma said, formalists study literature on a scientific basis through objective analysis of the motives, devices, techniques, and other functions that comprise the literary work. Context and author are discarded in form irony, ambiguity, and other literary techniques and strategies in a narrative. When Huckleberry Finn is analyzed through the lenses of formalism, it is observed that Twain particularly employs satire, irony, and symbol, and how they function in the novel. Historically, the formalist approach in criticism has focused on lyric poetry and short stories than on novel. But novel too is an art form, and a close reading of it can expose its form and how the author controls that form. When we approach this form of Huckleberry Finn, it can be diagrammed as a capital letter I. At each end, there is a block of chapters set on the land where Tom Sawyer exists and even dominate. In the middle are chapters largely related to the river as Huck and Jim travel down the Mississippi. In the middle, there is a pattern of alternations between land and river. And when we take the novel as a whole, there is a pattern of departures and returns which constitute the form of the novel. Mark Twain masterfully chose Huck Finn himself as the point of view character. He allowed the central character to relate his adventures in his own way. He is an objective narrator. He is objective about the society. When he lies or steals, he assumes that society is right and that he is simply depraved. He is always honest and pragmatic. Such a narrative offers a position to the reader from which the events in the novel must be considered. Does it control our responses to the story? Huck becomes the medium from which we can measure the hypocrisy of Miss Watson, contrast between Huck and Tom Sawyer, and finally judge the whole society along the river. Eliot says, Huck has not imagination in the sense in which Tom has it. He has instead vision. He sees the real world and he does not judge it. He allows it to judge itself. The movement of the novel has an effect on the total shape of the work. The aimless plot and a straightforward narrative is suited to the personality of Huck. In classic romantic novels, we expect to find a complex central situation, but in Huckleberry Finn, there is no real center to the plot. Instead, we have what Kenneth Burke has called the repetitive form. That is, there is no real connection between situations or episodes. They are just loosely held by the presence of Huck and Jim, which share a cumulative role, that is the repetitive form. When we review all these diverse episodes, it is evident that they are really reenactments of the same insistent revelation that the mass of humanity is hopelessly depraved and the genuinely honest individual is constantly victimized, betrayed, and threatened. That is the repetitive form in this novel. The framework of the plot is journey from north to south, a journey from innocence to revelation, or a journey from innocence to horrifying knowledge. The main literary devices used in this novel are symbol, irony, and satire. The Mississippi is the novel's major symbol. It is the symbol for freedom, peace, fertility, and friendship. There are lyrical passages in the novel in which Huck communicates, even with all his colloquial limitations, his feelings about the river and its symbolic functions. The book's structure parallels the river's flow. While land is an oppressive place for Huck, which represents civilization, bondage, and malignity, satire is explored in the novel extensively, such as satire of slavery, family, government, and superstition. Twain satirizes institution of slavery through characters such as Miss Watson and Pap Finn, who are racist characters advocating the slavery. In addition to that, government and politics are criticized through characters of Colonel, King, and Duke. Colonel kills a man, while King and Duke are fraudulent who try to steal Will's inheritance. Irony as a literary device is also important in the novel. Ironical approach can be seen in actions of characters such as Tom, Jim, and Miss Watson. Miss Watson is a pious woman who ironically owns a slave. Ranger Fords ironically recognizes the enemy by clothing. The river in the novel carries Huck and Jim out of each adventure towards freedom. But the major irony is that the freedom is never really achieved. The circular pattern of flight and captivity goes on.
I think Farisa has some connectivity issues. She has left the meeting. Naura, you may call the next person.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, Fariza and Nejma. It was an awesome presentation. Now, let me invite Fita and Munawira for introducing eco-criticism.
Good morning, all. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Munawira Nasrin. Me and Fida Mustafa are doing a presentation on an eco-critical approach to Huckleberry Finn. And I'll introduce the theory to you, and the rest will do by Fida. Simply defined, eco-criticism is a study of relationship between literature and the physical world. It deals with how environmental issues, cultural issues concerning the environment and attitudes towards nature are presented and analyzed. Main goals in eco-criticism is to study how individuals in society behave and react in relation to nature and ecological aspects. Actually, eco-criticism gained a lot of attention during recent years due to higher social emphasis on environmental destruction and increased technology. Earlier, all the cultural and critical studies focused on the issues like culture, race, gender, class, etc. And in the 20th century, the world woke up to a new disaster, that is, ecological disaster, which includes nuclear war, depletion of natural resources, global warming, pollution, etc. And also, numerous green movements sprung all over the world. Deep ecology and ecofeminism were two versions of environmentalism, and they question the idea of development and modernity. Talking about the origin, William Ruckert is believed to have coined the term eco-criticism in 1978, which he defines as the application of ecology and ecological concepts to the study of literature. Eco-criticism began in USA in late 1980s and in UK in early 1990s, and it expanded as a widely used literary and cultural theory by the early 1990s with the formation of ASLI, that is the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment in 1992. Cheryl Claude Pelty is the founder of ASLI, and it has its own house journal named ISLI, that is Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment. The movement emerged on the shoulders of environmental movement in 1960s and with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Eco-critics ask questions such as how is nature represented in novel, poem, or play? And what role does the physical geographical settings play in the structure of the novel? How do our metaphors of the land influence the way we treat it? That is, what is the link between pedagogic or creative practice and actual political or social cultural um, behavior towards the land and other non-human life forms? Or how is science in the form of genetic engineering, technologies, or of reproduction, sexuality is open to critical scrutiny in terms of the effects of science upon the land? Also, the essential assumptions, ideas, and methods of ecocritics may be summed up as follows. As ecocritics believe that human culture is related to the physical world, and ecocriticism assumes that all life forms are interlinked. Ecocriticism expands the notion of the world to include the entire ecosphere. Moreover, there is a definite link between nature and culture, and whether literary treatment, representation, and thematization of land and nature influence actions of the land. To know more about the theory, there were several critical works had published, such as The Future of Environmental Criticism by American professor Lawrence Buell, who widely recognized as a major pioneer of eco-criticism, Ecology Without Nature by Timothy Morton, and Politics of Nature by Bruno Latour, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, The Comedy of Survival by Joseph W. Meeker, etc. And talking about Mark Twain, his metaphorical nature of writing of nature can be seen clearly in Huckleberry Finn. Natural world figures prominently in the writings of Twain as portrayed in the life of Mississippi, such as in Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, and The Tragedy of Puddinghead Wilson, and more. The theory is vast, and for the time being, I'm concluding my brief presentation. And Fida will apply the theme of eco-criticism in novel by quoting Mark Twain's lines. I'm concluding my presentation. Nature knows no indecencies, man invents them. Thank you.
Good morning. Am I audible and visible?
Yes.
A very pleasant morning to one and all present here. My name is Vida, and I'll be presenting on an eco-critical reading of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So, our relationship, perhaps the literary relationship with nature, has evolved along the years from classical pastoral to romantic love of wild nature, then transcendentalism, and then the later environmentalism and eco-criticism. As Manavira mentioned, the environmentalism was being prominent since the 1960s with the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And also you have mentioned about the William Brookett's first use of the term eco-criticism, and Cheryl Gottfelty's definition of eco-criticism, which is the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. So in that regard, the animal, nature, humanity, progress, and culture acquire new symbolic meanings with recontextualized rereadings of these texts. So with this echolinks, I'm going to analyze the American classic, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So I really like to problematize the real pseudonym of Mark Twain. So Mark Twain means 2 fathoms, so which is associated with river navigation. And this name also adds to the nature-culture conflict, both within the author and his hero, Huck Finn. So it's set in the 1840s antebellum society. The book was published in 1885, but was banned in Boston and Concord Public Library for finding it rough, coarse, and inelegant. So recent reactions also finds the book to be really racial because of the racial stereotyping because it still remains problematic in the 21st century. So being the American realist, Twain foregrounds the Mississippi River, being the first to have efficiently done so. So he was born during the time of romantic association of East Coast by writers like Emerson, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and the later expansion of America towards the westwards. Twain was attempting to disillusion the West of the East, which was then described as rough, primitive, dangerous, and he is adopting realism to represent the local, innocent, crude, and funny East. So he was a regional humorist, and Twain depicts the social ecosystems to mark the East-West conflicts, white-black conflicts, and the nature-culture conflicts. So it is a 12-year-old hero, Huck, whose narration serves it right to illustrate these conflicts, for he is liminal in these conflicts. So the river is a central character, being both the paradise and the providence in the adventures of Huck, and his fellow fugitive, Jim, who is the runaway slave of Miss Watson. So he found Jim elusively on the Jackson Island like Robinson Crusoe. So though restricted to the young adults, the 7-year production of this novel marks this mastery of its author to bring out the conflicts of convention and rebellion, respectability and individuality, shore and draft, official and vernacular, through the narration of a 12-year-old. So while reading the nature beyond the utility of the setting of the novel, the human relationships also add to the change of equation between man and nature. So the colonial enterprise has disrupted both the natural and the social ecosystems with the transplanting of Jim and Huck. One can clearly spot the difference of attitude towards nature and fellow human beings, both by the higher white and the lower blacks. The settlers lack the organic relationship with nature and means no more than utility and raw materials, unlike the blacks like Jim, who despite the displacement finds an organic connection with nature, which is rather ecosophical, as evident during the Jackson Island episode, where he anticipates rain, observing the behavior of the birds. So Huck finds nature no more than his medium of freedom, source of food, shelter, or means to his adventures or pranks. Though the river becomes the paradise of freedom and fraternity for both the fugitives, his attitude remains anthropocentric. The use of land-river binary to mark the nature-culture of conflict is problematic, for both are being subjected to pollution and exploitation by settlements and steamboat navigations respectively. So the nature is reduced to glorify the adventures of Huck for describing the setting, or at times describing Jim derogatively, which is humanizing nature, or perhaps making the humans wild. So the river becomes the symbol of the organic unity between nature and culture, affecting a harmonious ecosystem for both social and natural, which is marked by the genuine and honest relations. For the land is marked by greed and dishonesty. This absence of social ecosystem affect the relationship, for there is no hierarchy on the raft. without the external intervention, as you can see in the episode of the conmen, duke and king, and also their interactions on the land. So as a natural force, river constantly changes and renews itself and drives life forward. Opposing any rigid political and cultural system, the river represents a counterforce of renewal in this novel. And the broad, tranquil, and beautiful river symbolizes freedom and hope for Huck and Jim, pacifying the persistent fugitives like a mother and accusing all the evil of the civilized society at that time. Despite all this, the conflict remains unresolved towards the end. Huck remains loyal to the conventional Tom Sawyer than the loyal brotherhood he shared with Jim on the river. Toni Morrison offers insight into her own experience of reading the novel a number of times over many years, concluding that Huckleberry Finn is a classic, in part because of the powerful way that it races, but does not answer questions about race, culture, character, and nation. The river raft, which was destined to affect the ecosophical outlook and enhance the natural and cultural ecosystem, is absent in the novel towards the end. This unresolved ending and Twain's ironic humor makes it difficult to locate his position in this regard, making the nature and the river reduced to the utility of describing the atmosphere, carry the plot, and wild attributions to human, making the novel anthropocentric than the possible assumption of being it ecocentric. So that's all my presentation. Hope you got a bit takeaway from it. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you, Fita and Manovara. It was a grand presentation. So all our presentations are completed perfectly and systematically. Once again, let me thank all our postgraduates for this wonderful presentation and for convincing Huckleberry Finn from different perspectives. I express my sincere gratitude to our beloved mentor, Mufida ma'am, for taking initiative and giving us this opportunity. I also thank all my dear friends for making this program an effective one. Thank you all and have a nice day.
So thank you all. You may leave now. First BA English students, please join Hashmina ma'am's class, and PG students, you may go to UB's class. So that was a wonderful session. Thank you all.